The Arizona sky on a September afternoon in 1889 was filled with rolling black clouds like giant boulders. The smell of acrid dust, mixed with the dampness of impending rain, made the air so thick it threatened to swallow the barren land. Evelyn Carter stood on the porch of her small cabin, one arm around a pillar, the other clutching a thin shawl around her shoulders. At 25, her face was lined with worry. Her husband, Daniel, had died of a fever 2 winters earlier, leaving Evelyn alone on a frontier land where the law was only gunfire, and survival depended on calloused hands. The wind howled in gusts. Evelyn bent down to pick up some firewood from the pile, but a sound stopped her, the pounding of horses' hooves tearing through the air. Her heart pounded. People around here still whispered about Apache raids. Some said they were just rumors to scare immigrants. Others swore they'd seen fires burning from ransacked farms. Evelyn dropped the log from her hand, her whole body shaking, but her feet were firmly planted. From the top of the hill, 5 silhouettes of horses appeared. Spectacular steeds painted in red and black streaks charged down, kicking up clouds of dust. Warriors with faces painted in charcoal and clay, their cold eyes betraying no emotion. Evelyn wanted to run, but her ex-husband's words echoed in her head. Never let them see you afraid. Fear calls trouble faster than blood. She bit her lip, forcing herself to stand up straight as the riders stopped in front of the porch. The leader dismounted in one swift motion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark eyes gleaming with determination. A scar running down his left jaw added to his ferocity. Evelyn expected to see cruelty in his eyes, but what she saw instead was a cold calm, like a judge weighing his prey. She stammered a few Apache words she'd picked up from Mexican traders. "Please, I have nothing of value." The man tilted his head, speaking quickly to his companions. The two of them walked straight into the house. A few minutes later, they emerged with a sack of flour, a bag of dried beans, Daniel's old rifle, and a wooden box containing her mother's only memento, a silver necklace. Evelyn choked, tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't dare cry out. As the leader approached, she instinctively backed up against the pile of wood. His breath smelled of leather, smoke, and horse sweat, heavy, thick, making Evelyn's head spin. He spoke in hoarse English, not quite articulate, but enough for her to understand. "You come with me." "No, this is my home. I can't leave." Evelyn trembled but remained stubborn. Something flashed in his eyes, annoyance or contempt. He raised his hand, and another warrior pulled on the rope. Panic rushed into Evelyn's chest. She burst into tears, her English broken. "Please spare me. I have never harmed your people." The leader stared at her, his eyes dark as a pit. Then suddenly he stepped forward, a strong arm around her waist, lifting Evelyn up like a sheaf of grain. Before she could struggle, he placed her on the back of the large horse, then jumped up and sat behind her. Evelyn's body was pressed tightly against his warm chest. His arms were closed, holding the reins tightly. She could feel his heartbeat, strong, steady, like a war drum beating through the howling wind. At that moment, the world seemed to shatter. Rain poured down, stinging her skin. Evelyn's clothes clung to her and she was cold, but suddenly a warm leather blanket was draped over her shoulders. A man's hand gently adjusted the cloth, brushing across her shoulder blades, making her shiver. No explanation, no wild laughter, just a heavy silence. They rode across the prairie, over fiery canyons, over sheer cliffs. Evelyn had no idea where they were going. She only knew that her body was shaking, from cold, from fear, and from something hard to name: protection. As night fell, the caravan stopped in a valley where fires flickered from round hide tents. Children chattered, women chattered, and skin drums echoed. Evelyn was pulled from her horse. The leader put his hand on her hip to steady her. But instead of letting go, his hand lingered for a beat, pressing against her waist longer than necessary. Blood rushed to Evelyn's cheeks, her breath caught in her throat. He led her toward the center of the camp, where an old man with white hair sat solemnly smoking his pipe. They spoke in Apache, long and tense. The leader's eyes occasionally turned to Evelyn, deep and searching. Finally, the old man nodded. The man bowed and pulled Evelyn into a small hut. Inside was only a leather rug, a few simple objects, and an unlit fire pit. He bent down and lit the fire, his large hands deftly arranging the sticks. As the light flickered, his face revealed itself, angular, resolute, but also strangely attractive. He looked straight into Evelyn's eyes, his voice low. "From now on, you belong to me." Evelyn stiffened. "Why? Why me?" He was silent for a long time, then said softly, "My name is Aiden Blackhawk. I need a wife. Others choose Apache women. I choose differently." Evelyn shook her head, her voice choking. "I don't want." Aiden's eyes darkened. He leaned in so close that Evelyn felt the heat on her cheeks. But instead of violence, he whispered, "You're afraid? But you're still standing, like a warrior. I won't hurt you. When you're ready, I'll wait." At that moment, Evelyn's heart raced. She hated the possession, but she couldn't deny that there was something else in his eyes, not just power, but a vague promise of safety. Outside, the drums echoed. Inside the tent, there was only the flickering firelight, and the two of them breathing. Heavy, overlapping, like the storm still raging inside Evelyn's heart. The flickering light of the tent fire illuminated Aiden Blackhawk's face, turning his eyes into smoldering coals. Evelyn Carter sat huddled on the buffalo hide, her hands clutching the edges of her skirt, soaked from the storm. She shivered not just from the cold, but from the uncertain future that lay before her. "You belong to me," he had said, like a verdict. Now the silence that stretched between them only deepened the words. Outside, the drums pounded. The sounds of laughter were distant. But inside the small tent, the air was as thick as her chest was about to burst. Evelyn took a deep breath, forcing herself to ask, "Why me? How many women are there in this tribe? Why choose an outsider?" Aiden sat up straight, his broad shoulders defying the space. He picked up a stick, turned it in his hand, and replied slowly, "Because you are different. You are a widow, with no one waiting for you. You look straight at me without bowing your head. And," his gaze sank into Evelyn's blue eyes, "you remind me of my mother." Evelyn's heart tightened. The man before him did not shy away from the truth. His mother was a white woman who had been captured, but eventually became the wife of an Apache chief, giving birth to Aiden. Half of his blood, the piece that made him looked at strangely by both worlds. Evelyn clenched her fist. "If I refuse?" Aiden was silent for a long time, his face like stone. Then he tilted his head slightly, his voice hoarse. "Then you will not survive. Samuel and the others will see you as a burden. Without me, they will drag you out tomorrow morning." A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. It was not a threat, it was the naked truth. She bowed her head, her hands covering her face. She felt trapped between two paths, becoming a prisoner of a strange man or dying at the hands of bloodthirsty warriors. Both were chains, but at least the former gave her a breath. Suddenly, Aiden stood. He stepped closer, his shadow looming over Evelyn. She tensed, but instead of pouncing, he knelt down, gently lifting her chin with a rough finger. "I promise," he said, his voice low like an oath, "you will not be forced. Until you want. I can wait." His breath fanned against her cheek, hot but gentle. Evelyn felt as if she were held in a ring of fire, trembling and strangely safe. Suddenly, Aiden pulled the leather blanket over her shoulders. The moment the leather touched her neck, his hand slid down her arm, stopping at the back of her hand. His hand was large and calloused, almost completely covering Evelyn's small hands. They sat still, listening to the crackling of the fire. Evelyn wanted to pull her hand away, but couldn't, partly because she was afraid, partly because she didn't want to. Finally, she whispered, her voice trembling, "Then, I will stay. But not as your wife. Not now." Aiden's eyes flashed as if he had found a piece of gold in the ashes. He didn't smile, but the tension in his shoulders relaxed. He nodded. "Enough. You have chosen." The next morning, when Evelyn stepped out of the tent, the eyes of the Apache camp were on her. Children pointed, women whispered, and warriors looked at her suspiciously. She felt like a strange animal thrown into a cage. Ayana, the young girl who had brought water the day before, appeared. She gave Evelyn a half-curious, half-sympathetic look, then pulled her hand to the group of women preparing breakfast. A gray-haired woman handed Evelyn a wooden pestle, signaling her to pound corn. Evelyn hesitated, then set to work. Her movements were awkward at first, but she gradually remembered the rhythm of her days on the farm with Daniel. The pounding was steady, the sound of cracking grain mixed with the laughter of children. For the first time since yesterday, her fear subsided, giving way to concentration on the task. When Evelyn looked up, she caught Aiden's eyes from afar. He was talking to some warriors, but his gaze stopped on her, sharp and deep. She quickly turned away, but her heart was pounding like a drum. That night, a campfire burned brightly in the valley. Apache songs echoed, strong and wild. Evelyn sat with Ayanna and the other women, still seeing the jealous eyes of Ida, the beautiful woman in the tribe, the one who had been destined to be Aiden's wife. When Aiden approached, the circle of camp fell silent. He held out his hand to Evelyn. For a moment she was confused, but Ayanna whispered, "Go. Otherwise, they will think you are weak." Aiden's rough hand grabbed hers, pulling her to her feet. He led her to the edge of the camp, where the firelight was only a distant streak of light. They stood side by side, silent. The night wind blew through the ravine, cool. Aiden tilted his head, whispering close to Evelyn's ear. "You chose to live. But living here means fighting. Tomorrow, you will learn." His breath touched the shell of her ear, making her whole body hot. Evelyn wanted to resist, but her legs refused to move. She only nodded slightly, her lips dry. In the darkness, Aiden pressed his hand to her shoulder, then withdrew, as if suppressing something deep. She saw the struggle in his eyes, longing, but bound by the promise of waiting. And in that moment, Evelyn realized, she had not just signed a sentence of imprisonment. She had opened another door. The door of survival, and perhaps of a dangerous love that was budding. The first light of dawn filtered through the canyons and into the valley where the Apache tribe had camped. The neighing of horses and the chattering of children mingled with the smell of smoke and damp grass. Evelyn opened her eyes, her whole body aching from sleeping on the hard buffalo hide. It took her a few seconds to remember that she was no longer in the log cabin by the ranch, but in a completely foreign world where all eyes were on her. Aiden was no longer in the tent. Only the dying fire and the leather blanket he had draped over her the night before remained. Evelyn touched it, still warm with his scent. The feeling sent a shiver down her spine, both comforting and dangerous, as if each strand of fur held an invisible string that bound her. Outside, Ayanna, the young girl from the day before, appeared with a small smile. She placed a bowl of water in front of Evelyn and gestured for her to wash her face. Evelyn did so, the cool water refreshing her somewhat. Ayanna said her name again, then pointed to Evelyn, calling, "Evelyn." The accent was soft but warm, like a small bridge connecting two worlds. But when Evelyn stepped out of the tent, the warm welcome vanished. Many women stared at her, some even turned away with disdain. Some children hid behind their mothers' skirts, their eyes curious and afraid. Then an elderly woman, her hair mixed with gray, came before her. She held out a wooden pestle, pointing to the pile of unpounded corn kernels. Evelyn understood without words. She bit her lip, sat down, and began pounding. At first, it was awkward, her hands aching, but she gradually regained the familiar rhythm from her days on the farm. The steady pounding made the surrounding whispers quiet. A few women nodded silently. Evelyn felt it clearly. To live here, she had to work, had to prove that she was not a burden. By noon, sweat soaked her back. Her arms were tired. She looked up and caught Aiden's eyes. He was leading a horse with a few warriors returning from patrol. His gaze lingered on her, an unreadable look, half cold, half filled with pride. Evelyn looked away in confusion, but her heart was pounding, as if to betray her vague emotions. In the evening, the tribe gathered around the campfire. They shared venison, drums pounding, songs ringing. Evelyn sat next to Ayanna, trying to keep herself small. But Ida's eyes, the beautiful woman with long black hair expected to become Aiden's wife, were fixed on her, sharp as knives. When Aiden approached to hand Evelyn a portion of the roast meat, Ida let out a small, sarcastic laugh. "Our strong warrior is now busy taking care of the weak sparrow." A murmur arose. Evelyn blushed, her lips trembling. She wanted to reply, but knew she lacked the language to counter the sarcasm. Aiden glanced at Ida, his voice low. Sparrows fly high when the wind blows. The words silenced the group. Evelyn didn't understand everything, but she clearly felt that it was a word of protection. A strange warmth spread through her chest. The next day, a new challenge came. A group of women invited Evelyn to wash clothes by the stream. The cold water flowed quickly. Her hands quickly became numb. Every time she slipped on a rock and almost fell, giggles rang out. But Ayana always caught her hand, her eyes encouraging, "Keep going." On the way back, Samuel, the young rebel, blocked Evelyn's path. He looked Evelyn up and down, his eyes full of contempt. "White people don't belong here. You weaken us." Before Evelyn could react, Aiden stepped forward, standing between her and Samuel. "You want to challenge me?" Aiden growled. The atmosphere was tense and suffocating. Evelyn clearly saw Samuel put his hand on the hilt of his knife. But then, after a moment that seemed like an eternity, he spat on the ground and turned away, leaving a hateful look. Evelyn trembled. When they were alone, she whispered, "He will kill me." Aiden looked straight ahead, his voice hoarse. "Not while I am alive." His hand unconsciously touched her elbow. Just a light touch, but it made Evelyn's whole body burn. She knew she should back off, but she couldn't. That night, Evelyn lay on the buffalo hide, unable to sleep. The distant singing gradually quieted down, leaving only the chirping of insects. The blanket still smelled of smoke, of horses, and of Aiden. She gently pulled it closer to her chest, hating herself and unable to resist the feeling of security. The image of Aiden in the firelight, his words, "I will wait," echoed in her mind. Evelyn whispered to herself in the darkness, "I am not yours. But why does my heart beat like this?" And so the first days in the Apache tribe passed, heavy, challenging, and lingering, with looks that made Evelyn both want to run away and not be able to leave. The rain that night came down suddenly, each drop as heavy as a stone falling on the hide tent. Evelyn was trying to keep the fire going when she heard the wind howling and cold drops leaking through the tent wall. The water quickly ran in streaks, dripping onto the hide mat where she lay. Panicking, she hurried to drag her belongings to a drier corner. But the wind grew stronger, the tent shaking violently. Just when she thought she would be soaked all night, the wall was lifted, and Aiden stepped in. He was soaked, his black hair stuck to his forehead, his deep, dark eyes gleaming in the flickering firelight. Without a word, he bent down to check for leaks, then stepped outside. He returned a few minutes later with a large leather tarp. "Hold tight," he commanded, his voice low. Evelyn stood awkwardly beside him, her hands shaking as they stretched it over the tent roof. The wind howled, the rain lashed at her, her thin dress clinging to her skin. Evelyn shivered, the cold piercing her bones. In that moment, Aiden's large hand found hers, squeezing tightly to hold the tarp. The heat from his skin spread through her small, cold fingers. Evelyn looked up, meeting his eyes in the darkness, so close she could feel his breath on her cheek, hot. Her heart skipped a beat. If she leaned any further, their lips would touch. Evelyn quickly turned away, trying to focus on the rain, but her mind was hazy. When the tarp was secured, they both sat down, panting. Evelyn couldn't help but hug her shoulders, shivering. Aiden looked at her for a moment, then took off his wet leather cloak and draped it over her shoulders. "Why did you?" Evelyn said softly, her voice breaking. Aiden only replied softly, "I promised. You're here. I'll protect you." That night they sat by the fire. The flickering fire illuminated every detail of Aiden's face. His tanned cheeks, his strong jaw, the scar on his cheekbone that made him look fierce and quiet. Evelyn felt herself drawn in, as if the darkness outside had disappeared, leaving only the two of them in the circle of light. Aiden slowly handed her a bowl of hot herbal tea. When his fingers brushed against hers, Evelyn flinched. But this time, she didn't let go. There was a long pause. Then Evelyn spoke softly. "You could have forced me from the very first day. Why hold back?" Aiden looked straight into her eyes, his voice hoarse. "Because I want you to look at me, not with fear." The words made Evelyn's heart clench. She turned away, but couldn't hide the blush on her cheeks. In the following days, Aiden began teaching her to ride. At first, Evelyn was clumsy, almost falling off the saddle. But every time, Aiden always had time to wrap his arms around her back, pulling her against his chest. The feeling of his solid chest and strong arms made her dizzy. One time, when the horse galloped over a small slope, Evelyn staggered, almost falling backwards. Aiden immediately pressed himself behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. His breath was hot on the back of her neck. Evelyn stiffened but did not push him away. In that moment, she suddenly realized the fear of that day was gradually turning into a strange trust. One afternoon, when the whole camp was resting after the hunting trip, Evelyn walked along the stream. Aiden followed, silent as a shadow. She bent down to wash her face, cold water splashing. Suddenly, his large hands reached out, grabbed her wrists, and lifted her up to keep her from slipping. They stood so close that Evelyn could hear her heartbeat. His face was only inches away, his eyes deep, both fierce and yearning. "Evelyn," he said her name for the first time, his tone unfamiliar but gentle. She looked up, her lips parted. But instead of kissing, Aiden just leaned down and touched his forehead to hers, a warm, intimate gesture that took her breath away. He whispered, "Whenever you want me, I'll be here." That night, Evelyn lay on the leather, unable to sleep. In her mind was Aiden's eyes, the feel of his arms around her waist, the gentle, trembling touch of his forehead. She knew she was crossing a dangerous line, from hate to love. She placed her hand on her chest, her heart pounding. In the darkness, she whispered as if confessing to herself, "You're the one who took me away. But my heart doesn't want to run away anymore." And so, in the silence of the mountains and forests, amid the fires, the night rain, and the unfinished embrace, the first love blossomed, hotter than fear, gentler than chains. The sky was bright with purple-gray clouds swirling, signaling the coming storm. Evelyn and Ayanna were pounding corn by the stove when the bugle sounded loudly throughout the camp. The soldiers returned from their posts, their faces tense. The usual cheerful atmosphere was instantly sucked away, replaced by chaos. "The soldiers are entering the valley," a soldier shouted. The words fell like a thunderbolt. Women hurriedly pulled their children into the tents. Soldiers ran to tie up horses, check their weapons. Evelyn saw Ayanna's face pale, and her heart sank. The American soldiers, people of the same skin color as her, were supposed to be the hope of liberation. But in a flash, Evelyn suddenly realized she was no longer sure whether she wanted to be liberated or not. Before she could process it, a shout rang out. Samuel, the young soldier who had always been spiteful, stepped into the middle of the camp yard, pointing his finger straight at Evelyn. "It's her!" he shouted. "She's a spy." The American soldiers came so quickly, if she hadn't informed them, how would they know where we were? All eyes turned to Evelyn. Suspicion flashed, spreading faster than a dry grass fire. Etta stepped out, her eyes glittering like knives, her voice full of venom. "You see, Blackhawk? Ever since that woman came, the tribe has been restless. Maybe she's not a sparrow, but a vulture leading the way." Evelyn was stunned, her face pale. "No, I don't know anything," she cried, her voice choking. But the whispers grew louder. The women who had once scorned her now looked at her like a sinner. Children hugged their mothers tightly, avoiding her gaze. Evelyn felt as if the ground was tilting under her feet. Aiden walked from afar, his eyes darkening like a storm. He stood in front of Evelyn, his voice hoarse. "Enough." "Are you blind?" Samuel roared, his hand on the hilt of his knife. "You let a foreigner control your heart, and you will destroy your entire tribe." Aiden did not draw his weapon, but his eyes flashed with lightning. "If you touch her, you will pay in blood." The two men looked at each other, and the whole camp held its breath. Evelyn saw Aiden's hand tremble slightly, not from fear, but from pent-up anger. Samuel growled, then drew his knife and rushed forward. The collision happened in an instant. Aiden dodged, throwing a punch straight into his opponent's jaw. Samuel fell back, blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. He scrambled to his feet, but was blocked by two older warriors. The drums sounded. The chief appeared, his eyes old but bright. He raised his hand to signal silence. His voice echoed like rolling stones. "This woman will have to prove herself. If she is a spy, she will die. If not, she must prove her worth to exist among us." Evelyn choked. Prove? How to prove what she did not do? Ayanna held her hand tightly, whispering, "They will test you. If you survive, they will believe." That night, Evelyn sat alone in the tent, tears welling up. Since her capture, she had experienced fear, contempt, and even cruel jealousy. But she had never felt so alone as she did now. The false accusations were like chains around her neck. The tent door opened slightly. Aiden entered, his tall figure blocking the fire. He sat down in front of her, his eyes glowing in the darkness. "You must be strong," he said, his voice low but trembling slightly. "Tomorrow they will test you. If you fall, I will not be able to protect you." Evelyn looked straight into his eyes, tears welling up. "Aiden, I didn't betray you. You have to believe me." He reached out and slowly wiped the tears from her cheeks. His calloused fingers brushed against her soft skin, making her shiver. His breath was close, hot. "I believe," he whispered. "But my belief isn't enough. You have to make them believe." Evelyn choked. What if I die?" His eyes flashed with pain. Aiden leaned down, his forehead touching hers, his voice whispering close to her lips, "I will go with you to the end." In that moment, Evelyn felt her heart break. She wanted to hate him, the man who had taken her from her home. But he was the only wall standing between her and the clan's blade. They sat close together, silent. No words needed, just their breaths mingling, the warmth spreading in the storm that was waiting outside. The next morning, the entire clan gathered in the clearing. The chief stood in the middle of the circle, his staff tapping the ground. He announced, "This woman is suspected of treason. She will be tested for women. If she proves brave, the clan will accept. If she fails, her blood will wash away the shame." Cheers, drums beat. Evelyn stood in the middle of the circle, head held high, heart pounding. Outside, Samuel and Etta smiled faintly, their eyes sharp as knives. Inside, Aiden stood behind, his eyes burning with faith. Evelyn swallowed, her hands trembling. But then she took a deep breath and told herself, "There will be no more room for tears. There is only one way: live or die." The sun was blazing red in the Arizona sky, its light falling on the ground where the entire tribe had gathered. Evelyn Carter stood in the middle of the circle of Apache warriors and women, her heart pounding like a drum. This was not just a test. It was a trial that would decide her life. The chief raised his staff. "You will join the hunt. If you prove brave and useful, the tribe will accept you. If you fail, you will no longer have a place." The cheers rose, tense and suffocating. Samuel smirked, and Ida folded her arms, her eyes disdainful. But behind her, Aiden stood silently, his eyes like arrows aimed straight at Evelyn's heart, strong but also filled with faith. The group rode out into the prairie. Evelyn was given a bow and a few arrows. Her hands were shaking, but Aiden's eyes, as he handed her the reins, whispered, "Believe in yourself. I'll be right behind you." The trumpets sounded, and the huge herd of bison roared and charged. The Apache women shouted, urging their horses to gallop alongside the herd. The ground shook beneath their hooves, and the wind stung their faces. Evelyn clung to the saddle, her heart pounding. She remembered the evenings Aiden had taught her to sit low, balancing on her knees. Now, those words were her lifeline. A young bison broke away from the herd. Ruth, the older woman, signaled to Evelyn. Her chance had come. She tightened her bowstring, pulled back the arrow, but her hands were shaking. The roar of the animal was like a tear to her eardrums. In her panic, Evelyn heard Aiden's voice, not loud but firm. "You stood the storm. You will stand it. Trust in the strength in your heart." The arrow left the string. It flew, hitting the bison in the shoulder. The animal staggered, collapsing after a few faltering steps. The whole group cheered. Evelyn gasped, eyes wide, not believing what she had just done. Ruth urged her horse forward, patting her shoulder, eyes shining with recognition. Even Etta, from a distance, swallowed her sarcasm, her lips pursed in bitterness. Evelyn had proven it, but the joy had not yet subsided. Samuel rushed out, shouting, "This is just a lie. You showed the way to the American soldiers. Now you pretend to be brave to please us." He drew his knife, rushing straight towards Evelyn. She was stunned, empty-handed. But Aiden was like a gust of wind, galloping his horse in front of her, his long knife blocking the slash. The two men rushed at each other, swords and knives sparking in the afternoon sun. Samuel growled, "You have disgraced the tribe. You chose a foreign woman over your own blood." Aiden roared, throwing a punch so hard that Samuel fell to the ground, the knife flying away. Another warrior rushed forward to hold him down. The chief stood up, his voice old but thunderous. "Enough, she has proven herself. Those who oppose her are those who oppose the tribe." Samuel was dragged away, his face bleeding but his eyes still burning with hatred. Evelyn stood still, her breathing ragged. Her heart was still filled with fear when she saw Aiden standing there, his eyes fixed on her. That night, the camp celebrated. Drums pounded, the smell of roasting meat filled the air. Evelyn sat outside the fire, away from the commotion. Her hands still trembled from the afternoon's slaughter. A shadow fell beside her. Aiden sat down, silent for a long time before speaking. "You won. Not just the test, but their hearts." Evelyn turned, her eyes glistening with tears. "I didn't do it for them. I did it for myself. I wanted to live." Aiden fell silent, then slowly reached out, lifting her hand. His skin was rough, warm, covering her small hand. The firelight reflected in his eyes, deep, fierce, yet gentle. "And for me?" he asked softly. Evelyn didn't answer right away. But when she looked into those eyes, where every promise, every touch was held back to the very end, she knew the answer was obvious. She nodded slightly. Aiden leaned down to the sound of drums and chants. His lips found hers, slow, trembling, but intense. For the first time, Evelyn didn't resist. Her heart opened, beating in sync with the thundering rhythm of his chest. The kiss wasn't just a joining of two people. It was a declaration that she was no longer a prisoner, but someone who had willingly entered his embrace. The next day, the sun rose, shining brightly over the valley. Evelyn rode beside Aiden, her hair flying in the wind. The women smiled and nodded, and children cheered and called her name in broken Apache. She was no longer Evelyn Carter, the lonely widow in the cabin. She was part of the tribe, a surviving warrior, a claimed wife. Aiden held her hand tightly on the saddle, whispering, "You chose me, and I will choose you for all eternity." Evelyn looked to the horizon, where red mountains and blue sky met. In that moment, she knew. Love born of storm and blood would burn forever. And so the story ended with recognition, not just from the tribe, but from Evelyn's own heart. Love, though it began in chains, was forged by trial to become an everlasting flame. Evelyn Carter began her journey as a frail widow, swept from her small home by a fateful storm. She thought she was a prisoner in the hands of a cold-hearted Apache warrior. But through each trial, from suspicious eyes to sarcasm to a deadly hunt, she learned to stand firm, not by the protection of others, but by the strength of her own heart. Aiden Blackhawk, the half-Apache, half-white leader, also bore the scars of division and prejudice. But his love for Evelyn became proof that gentleness and respect can heal the deepest barriers. True love does not spring from power or coercion, but from repression, from a voluntary choice between two hearts. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the trembling that moves forward, as Evelyn did in the midst of panic. Prejudice and hatred can tear communities apart, but trust and courageous action have the power to heal.